Well, on January 27, we had attempted launch and it got scrubbed. I went over to my friend's house, a fellow named Carver Kennedy. He was the vice president of our space services. He did the actually stacking of the boosters and the tank and the vehicle assembly building. And I was there about an hour and I got a phone call from one of the people that worked for me. And they said, Al, you know, we just heard that some meteorologist in Orlando was saying that these strong ground winds we saw, that right behind them is a cold front heading towards Florida. And it may be as cold as 18 degrees Fahrenheit by tomorrow morning at opening of the launch window. And I said, good grief, I'm really worried that our O-ring seals and these seal joints will operate properly, those kind of temperatures. And he says, yeah, we are too, and our engineers wanted me to call you to see if you can get from NASA an actual hour-by-hour forecast of the temperature at the launch site. I says, fine, I will get that for you. I want you to get all the engineers together to put together a presentation on what we know and don't know about the impact of these temperatures on this field joint. What is the lowest temperature it's safe to launch? And I want that done. I will set up a meeting with the NASA management here at the Cape. I will have them plug in their engineering people at the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville on this three-way teleconference with our engineers back in Utah, and I'll set that up for this evening. The conference call started a little after 8 o'clock that evening, and the engineers did exactly what I asked them to do and went through their charts. Roger Beaujolais was one of the major ones, Arnie Thompson, and they presented all what they knew and didn't know. And when they got all done, the vice president of engineering came on, a fellow by the name of Mr. Bob Lund that I had requested, and he said based on what his engineers had presented that he would not recommend launching below 53 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, this was the first time that Morton Thiokol, first of all, ever made any recommendation not to launch. In fact, as far as I know, it's the first time any contractor in the whole shuttle program ever made a recommendation not to launch. I was shocked at the response from NASA. And what surprised me is they started questioning the basis for that recommendation and said that they didn't feel that we had substantiated the need to placard the shuttle to that temperature limit. And furthermore, as far as they're concerned, they don't think the temperature has necessarily anything to do with it. And that's when Roger Beaujolais got very vocal about, as far as he was concerned, if you look at those, it's the influence of temperature. I was really surprised that Mr. Larry Mulloy, who was the head of the solid rocket boosters, said, well then, Thiokol, when the hell you want me to launch? Next April? When he said that, I thought that was very intimidating to me and everyone else. That it was clear they didn't accept what we had just said. And then he said, you know, the eve of a launch is a hell of a time to be changing the launch commit criteria. So then he asked his engineering guy, George Hardy at Marshall, what his position was. And he basically said that he was appalled at the recommendation we made based on the information we had. But he wouldn't go against the contractor's recommendation. After he had made that comment, Mr. Larry Mulloy then asked my boss, the vice president of Space Booster Programs, Mr. Joe Kilminster, he said, Joe, what's your position? And his position was that I can't go against our engineering's recommendation, but that he thinks that he would like to have some time to go off the net to make sure that we had presented everything we have, to make sure that we have no further information to make a judgment on. Because there was an implication that maybe we hadn't presented everything. And frankly, when that happened, I thought, sure, yeah, they're going to do the best they can and try to analyze what is the lowest temperature we can. Maybe it's not 53, but it's clearly probably not going to be 20. Well, what I found out later, what happened back in the conference call, engineers got put into a position to prove that it would fail at the expected temperatures. Now that's a totally different question than prove that it's safe. They could not prove that it would fail. That's the first problem. But the major problem was that The general manager of Morton Thiokol, a fellow named Jerry Mason, who I didn't even know was in this meeting at all, got up and said, he thought NASA had some good points. And that he said, am I the only one here that thinks it's okay to go ahead with the launch as planned? Well, that was an intimidating statement for him to make, because everybody became silent when he made that statement. And the only two people that weren't were the ones who were most knowledgeable in the first place, Roger Beaujolais and Arnie Thompson. Arnie Thompson went back there and said, hey, here's why we shouldn't change our recommendation. And Roger went back with the two photos and showed them between the cold and the hot. We're going in the direction of this one. It's going to get worse. We don't know where the cliff is, but there's one out there someplace. And they said, well, that's no new information, go sit down. At the Cape, I didn't realize that was happening. But when they did finally come back on, was my boss, Joe Kilminster, came on and said they reassessed all the data, and they have concluded that it's okay to proceed on with the launch as planned, no specific temperature. And I was kind of taken aback by that, because I didn't hear him present anything that new information that would change the original recommendation. But that's what he said. And then George Hardy at Huntsville said, well, we need to have that recommendation put in writing and signed by a responsible Thiokol official. And I knew who that responsible Thiokol official was. That was me. That was my job. That's why I was at the Cape. I did the smartest thing I ever did in my lifetime. I refused to sign the recommendation. I just didn't feel comfortable with it. And because of that, my boss had to sign it and fax it down to me. Well, I made a couple of very prophetic statements that night when I was waiting for this fax to come that was signed by my boss authorizing to proceed with the launch. I was very upset, and I told NASA that I don't know who made this recommendation. I really don't care if it's the CEO, but you can't accept it. So you can't accept it because you know, and I know, you're asking us to fly those solid rocket boosters outside of what they were qualified to fly in. That's a violation of protocol. You can't do that. I sure hope nothing happens tomorrow, but if it does, I'm not going to be the person to stand before a board of inquiry and tell them that I gave you my approval to launch my rocket boosters in an environment that they were never qualified to fly in. And that ended the conversation.